Bit of a pre-video edition here. I had recorded and uploaded this video prior to release, based on a version available about 3 days before the street date, though it appears they may have watched part of my stream since a handful of issues I bring up in this video have been dealt with thanks to a Day 0 patch. Most importantly, they have included an epilepsy warning screen on it, though it is worth noting as of the release there is still no option to disable this flashing. Overall, they have addressed about half of my concerns you'll hear here, so it would improve my rating of this slightly, from what would have been a 5 out of 10 to probably closer to a 6.5 or 7 out of 10. So good enough to play if you really like the genre, but there are better options. That said, here is the review of it from prior to this patch, since some of the issues do still exist. At first glance, this game was extremely promising, and I wanted to like it. The press material showed off the great artwork, action-packed levels, and boss fights, and it gave me a nostalgic feel for old platformers, especially stuff like Kirby from back in the day due to the chunky characters and design. Though, that excitement would fade very quickly, before the end of the tutorial in fact, and ultimately lead me to dropping the game, hence the first look instead of review in the title. Basically, before I'd even gotten to the core game, there were some signs that either this game was not compatible with me, or that something was off, because even as of the writing of this, I have yet to be able to complete the tutorial, though before you click off, it is worth noting that I did end up beating 2 of the game's entire worlds, since thankfully the tutorial is skippable, but I have yet to figure out just how it wants me to make what seems to be like an impossible double jump. So why did I end up leaving the game behind, even though I could skip this aspect that was holding me back? It's because the game shows a strongly established understanding of playing this type of game, but a lack of understanding of how this type of game usually fudges the rules in ways a normal player wouldn't notice, pretty much resulting in a situation of understanding what is wanted, but having to fight the game itself rather than the levels and the enemies to get that done. This resulted in a death by 1,000 paper cuts for me due to all the little frustrations, rather than something big being a major issue. Starting with the actual combat, we have 2 forms of attack. Our spell ability, which will stun most enemies, but kill certain other ones, so it feels a little inconsistent, and our stomp attack that will remind you fairly distinctly of Mario stomping on Goombas, and will pretty much kill anything that is not spiky on top. And with just that description, it would seem pretty straightforward. Stun and stomp until I tell you that if you jump on an enemy at an angle, you're going to take damage, because the hitbox requires landing square on top in most cases, and sometimes even then you can miss the enemy, which really sucked against a particular boss where I'd clip through them and land on spikes instead of heads. This, combined with the chunky graphics, made it feel not good to stomp on enemies, since being zoomed in like this is on the characters can honestly lead to issues navigating and stomping, and is one reason why games that do this type of design will often adjust the hitboxes to compensate for angular stomps. The other major design frustration that kind of stuck with me was some of the level design feeling, well, rough. For example, you had to take damage or even potentially die as a character to get some of the collectible furball guys that are used to upgrade your character. Other times, they'd have them hidden in poorly indicated secret areas, which probably wouldn't have been found, but they did thankfully have one that had a ledge pointed out, so there were several stages that I probably even missed them on that I'm gonna have to go wall humping on. There's also a lot of unforgiving navigation tools. For example, the bouncy mushrooms felt sluggish and unreliable due to having a relatively small action window, very picky double jump heights existed, and visually hard to distinguish objects as to whether they're in the foreground or the background made some of the more rushed levels and the side-scroller levels a little bit irritating. As far as the little nitpicky stuff that likely wouldn't bother most people, but I found myself getting cranky at because, while I'd already been frustrated by the bigger things, are things such as the unskippable cutscene when ascending to the shop area of the game, the world that gives the illusion of free navigation. Basically, it was like it was trying to be Cuphead levels of freedom, but you really don't have it, instead being more in line with things like Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Layer, where you need to do a goal to move forward. I would say gameplay-wise, it could use a little bit of a pass for game feel from the perspective of someone outside the company, since it very much feels like it didn't get a non-developer QA with the way a lot of this plays out, since it favors following a desired path and showing off things that obviously had a lot of effort put into them, but don't necessarily make the best gameplay experience. That said, these things do deserve to get looked at. Like I said early on, the graphics are great, the music is great, the animations are really cool, and I would love to see this game get the last few layers of polish on game feel and stuff like that to match these aspects. That, and maybe a little more interesting level design, since they did feel about on par with the early days of Kirby rather than the later days. There just wasn't much interaction in the world outside of swapping purple water to blue and walking right in at least the first two worlds. As far as accessibility and options, they're about what you'd expect from a 2D pixel art game, scaling, audio, etc. I think the only thing missing, and this is actually super important, is there needs to be an epilepsy warning on this and an option to disable flashing, since it came up a few times, but the earliest, and by far the worst, was the save slot select screen, which you see before you even get into the game. I'm not even epileptic, and that messed with my eyes. And no, I'm not even going to show it, but let's just say it makes strobe lights seem tame. Overall, my opinion of the game is that there's a lot of quality work put into it, and there is a good game to be had here. It just needs to be given the once-over for more forgiving design, with special attention that should be paid to Mario-style design and how it handles hitboxes, angles, and jumping being of special interest, since they often bend rules to improve the game feel overall. With that, the game could go from its current meh to being a really solid competitor in the platforming space. With that said, I'll send you off to another platformer review on screen now and give a special thanks to the generous patrons that make this content possible.